Okay, so my name is Amandine Yanguenon. I'm the Senior Fellow and the Head of Geopolitics Program at the Africa Policy Research Institute, APRI. And I'm the Master of Ceremony for today. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you today for this discussion on Africa-Europe relations in a changing global political order, the next step after the Angola Summit. So actually this edition is the second one of the Africa in the World High-Level Roundtable series. And the idea is really to explore how Africa positions in global affairs. I won't talk too much because we're going to have plenty of good speakers today. I would like just particularly to say thank you for the FES for welcoming us today for this event. I would like to say a special thank you for the APRI team and also to our distinguished panelists and especially the people who travel. Thank you especially for El Gassim traveling directly from Africa. Just a quick reminder, this session is live streamed. The breakout session will be for in-person only, but just for you to know, we have people online, so you will be online. And I think without further delay, it's my pleasure to invite Henrik for the opening remarks. Henrik, the floor is yours.
Yes, good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to have you all here in this room here at the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation in Berlin. Amandine, thank you very much for the kind words. My first thanks should go to APRI for actually sharing your event series with us because it's an established format and we're very, very happy to be able to take part in it. But before I start with some more points that I would like to make, I would like to warmly welcome really also those who have traveled far. I see our friend El Gassim Wan, who I met only 3 weeks ago. We met in Dakar. Sorry, it's a bit colder here, but I hope you nevertheless enjoy your time in Berlin. It's really great that you made it here. I also want to recognize Udo Bullmann, a member of the European Parliament, who is here with us, a great friend of FES, and we'll be hearing from both of them on the panel. Gesa Bräutigam from the German Foreign Office is with us. We later expect Birgit Pickel, the Africa Director at the BMZ, the Development Ministry, and I think we also have the European External Action Service with us. And I'm not sure whether there are excellencies in this room, but I want to observe the protocol. So please feel welcomed here at FES. Let me just say why we are doing this as Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung jointly with APRI. At FES, we have 19 offices in sub-Saharan Africa, and I can share with you that all of these offices were expecting a lot from the recent summit, the AU Summit in Luanda. But then, when the summit happened, and I'm going to speak about it, I think it was fair to say that it was overshadowed by events elsewhere. I remember sitting here in Berlin watching the Tagesschau, and I saw a microphone, and I saw the Atlantic in the back, and I saw a German chancellor and a lot of Europeans running around talking to each other about Ukraine. I didn't hear much about the EU+EU agenda that was discussed at this very summit. So we decided, let's do it at FES together with APRI and revisit this summit and also raise a little bit of attention why the summit was important and what to take away from it. One thing that was said there was, and I quote from the declaration, "Our common future lies in closer cooperation and collective action for the mutual benefit of the peoples of Africa and Europe." The question is how and what is new? And I think that's what we want to discuss here today. I can also share with you that our perspective here at FES, and as far as Olo will speak after me, I'm not sure how APRI views it, but I'm pretty sure it's similar, is that the view on this summit and the EU+EU cooperation should not be one of geopolitical competition or leaving spaces to others. It's about, and that's my view on it, that there is a genuine, broad, and amazing potential of 82 small and mid-sized countries who all rely on fair multilateralism, predictable relations come together. And to shed a bit more light on what kind of cooperation that could be is one of our goals tonight. There's one question that I already have for this panel, and I guess it goes to Gesa Bräutigam, and I will close with this, is we live in a European Union where at least one country that used to be very, very influential when it comes to Africa policy and was taking a lead might not always be, accepted as the lead in many parts of the continent. So that means Germany, at least in some situations, would have to take a lead when it comes to Africa relations of the European Union. And I would like to understand a little bit better how that lead could look like. With those remarks, I'm looking forward to the discussions and welcome once again here at FES. I look forward to today's discussion. And Amandine, should I directly invite Olu? Olu, the floor is yours.
I was going to say, that's not my name. She fixed it. Thank you very much, Henrik. If I was in Nigeria, I'd start by saying all protocol duly observed, or standing on an existing protocol, but I'm not going to do that here because I don't think I have to. But more seriously, I want to join Henrik in thanking you all for joining us here today. I know how busy the period is. At the end of every year, each year, it's tasking to close the year. I'm glad and happy that you shared part of your end of the year with us. I'm also very delighted to be working with the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung to put this together. They're a great partner to us and a long-standing and trusted partner for African countries. Henrik already spoke about how many offices they have on the continent, and I hope it stays the same. I would like to express my thanks to Henrik and to the entire Africa department, especially Andreas and Svende, for this rich collaboration and for warmly welcoming us into their home. So let me talk a bit about this series, because Henrik already mentioned that when he was speaking. Africa in the World. It's an annual series that we at APRI started last year. We designed this series as a way to explore, to debate, and to illuminate Africa's position in the international system, as well as in the ways in which stakeholders across the continent are negotiating and managing current and future partnerships with global actors. We also designed it as a way of engaging African policymakers and European policymakers. And because we're doing this in Berlin, the capital city of the largest economy in Europe, and some would argue the most important country in the Union, we always want to have a strong representation from the German Africa political landscape in Berlin. One key way to signal this is by partnering together with a strong player in this landscape. Last year, we did this together with the BMZ, and we spoke about Africa, what development cooperation still means to Africa, and what it might mean to Germany moving forward. And we also sort of try to look for pathways forward that would respect each other's sovereignty and also each other's priorities and agency. We timed this one this year. So last year we did it to start the political calendar of Berlin. It was in January 2024. When we were planning this, we started planning it in autumn last year. We also wanted to do the same thing, but we all know what happened towards the end of last year. The government was dissolved, and then the political calendar for this year was, at the beginning of the year, was basically a campaign calendar. So we didn't have the event in January. But together with the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, we've been talking to them since last year, we decided to still do it this year, but we wanted to find a very momentous time and time it to something that's happening that concerns Africa, that concerns Europe, and that could be a hook for us to discuss the relationship between the two partners, but also as a way to set the agenda for Berlin for next year. So today, it's happening after a very busy international diplomacy calendar. We've had the COP in Belém, then we had the G20 summit, the first in Africa, shortly after that. Then we also had the AU+EU summit, which Henrik alluded to already. Today we want to have a look back at the AU+EU summit, which just happened a week ago, by looking at it through two lenses. One is trade and infrastructure development, and second is how to better align European and African visions for critical raw materials. As we all know, in this midst of the shift towards a new energy transition, towards the shift towards technologies that require minerals, Africa has been talked about as being very important. Europe also says this. We know that Europe needs the minerals. We know that African countries have some of these minerals. And for Africans, it's an opportunity for them not just to sell minerals again, but to actually kickstart the economy in ways that they've been hoping for quite a while. So I'm hoping that the discussions we have today will help us kind of think through how we actually deal with that. How does Europe engage with Africa in a way that works for both sides on critical raw materials, but also on trade and investment, because that's also something that Africans have been asking for. So once again, I want to thank you all for your participation. I've got a list of people to thank here, so please excuse me, I'm going to go through it. Many thanks to the APRI team for making this happen. Amandine and Lily, thanks a lot. Without you, this doesn't exist. Vincent and Yaman from the comms team, I'm grateful to you for making this happen. Judy, Simoa, Jason from the executive team, thanks for making this happen as well. I also want to thank sincerely the experts of the two breakout sessions for being with us here today, either in person or virtually, and for sharing their valuable insights, which will greatly enrich our discussion today. Tenio Latayo, Bruce Byers, Micah Schulze, Christian Geronima, I hope I haven't missed anyone. If I did, I apologize, that's my fault. I'll now give the floor to Lidette to take us to the first panel, which will be looking at the evolving landscape in which these two actors are playing. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome such distinguished representatives from African diplomacy, the European Parliament, the European External Action Service, and the German Federal Foreign Office. Many thanks to Juan for being here, Assad Beg, who's joining us online, Gesa Breutigam from the Foreign Office, and Udo Bollmann from the European Parliament for accepting our invitation. I hope we have a stimulating discussion today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this discussion on the EU-AU, but also Germany partnership in a geopolitical context. I see, oh. Yes. I see Brussels has gotten us off to a good start. Yes. This conversation on the EU-Africa partnership and also Germany's role in it, of course, is had in the broader context of a changing geopolitical landscape, but it's also being had against the backdrop of the recently concluded EU-Africa Summit, which was held in Luanda, Angola, marking also the 25th anniversary of the EU+EU partnership. For this discussion, we have a formidable panel composed of leading thinkers, advisors, people who have thought about the partnership but have even shaped the partnership, to give us different perspectives on where this partnership is going, what Germany's role is in it, and more importantly, how it could be made more effective and stand up to the demands of the times, as well as those of the citizens on both sides of the Mediterranean. And in addition to the panelists, of course, we also have you, people in this room, as well as those of you who are watching online. So thank you so much for joining us. Without further ado, I will now introduce the panelists that we have. First off, I will start with Mr. Al-Qasim Wan, a very well-known thinker, but also doer in the African peace and security landscape. He used to be the special representative of the UN Secretary General and head of MINUSMA, but Mr. Wan was also the director of the Peace and Security Department of the African Union Commission, so a leading figure in that space. Very happy to see you on this side, Mr. Wan. And we also have Ambassador Gesa Botigam, who's joining us. She's a senior German diplomat who currently serves as a director for Sub-Saharan Africa in the Sahel at the German Foreign Office. But Ambassador Botigam also brings in a lot of experience following Germany's participation and contributions to various multilateral organizations, such as the EU, NATO, and OSCE. And we have Mr. Udo Bullmann. He's a well-known figure in the SPD movement in Germany, who's currently a European Union, a member of the European Parliament. He is the coordinator of the Committee on International Development, as well as a member of the Committee on International Trade. And he was just telling me that one of his key responsibilities is also being part of the parliamentary delegation working with South Africa, where good things are happening. Last, but definitely not least, we have Mr. Assad Beg in Brussels. Well, Mr. Beg is very well known in Brussels, and not only because of his various responsibilities in the EU institutions, but because of his very frank and constructive contributions to the EU-Africa partnership, I must say. And he is currently the senior advisor on EU+EU affairs at the European External Action Service. So very happy to see you again, Mr. Beg. So these are the speakers that we have for this conversation. Each speaker will have around 7 minutes to share your reflections. And everyone should be aware that this is this conversation is not held under Chatham House rules, but do not let that deter you from sharing your perspectives, especially if you feel like that will move the partnership forward. I will now give the floor to Mr. Wan. You have seen the EU-Africa partnership over the years, and my question to you is, how can the African Union be a proactive actor in the EU-Africa partnership, and how can it do so while also trying to manage very challenging peace and security context back home or within Africa? So how can it really tap into the changing geopolitical context, shape the EU-Africa partnership, but also not forget its continental obligations? I give the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Lidette, and thanks, of course, to the Friedrich-Ebert Foundation for inviting me, and I'm happy to be part of this panel. I did work on the AU+EU partnership way back. I was much younger, but I did work on it for a very long period of time until I left the AU in 2015, and later on also when I rejoined as Chief of Staff from 2017 to 2019. Now, I just focus on the issue you raised to stay within the limits of the 7 minutes you gave me. I think before, in actual fact, talking about how the EU could play a bigger role, it's important, in my view, at least to recall, to stress that the two institutions, AU and the EU, have come a long way in their partnership. I remember very much in the late 90s, if my memory serves me well, early 2000, but probably in the late 90s, when I was a young officer, well, younger officer at the AU Peace, not AU, at the OAU Political Affairs Department, that was the name. And then we started working with the EU. I remember we started working on the provision of communication equipment to OAU for its missions. And it took maybe 2 years for the EU to deliver. It was quite bureaucratic, we were frustrated, but it was a small-scale cooperation. And since then, things have evolved so much that often when we look at the challenges, we tend to forget what has been achieved. And what has been achieved, I believe the turning point was, in my view, because I'm talking from the standpoint of peace and security, the area on which I worked, the starting point, the turning point, was Maputo in July 2003. The first or second AU summit. AU was launched in Durban in July 2002, and then we had the summit in Maputo. And why Maputo was critical, in Maputo, African head of states and government made a request for the establishment of an instrument to finance AU peace and security activities. And of course, the AU had a very ambitious agenda, still has a very ambitious agenda deriving from the Peace and Security Council protocol, and just from all the hope that was pinned down in the organization to be ready to lead Africa's efforts to address peace and security. And the EU responded positively. The Africa Peace Facility was established. And we were, of course, in the early years, because the Peace and Security Council protocol was launched in May 2004, and the early visibility and actions of the Peace and Security Council were made possible thanks to the Africa Peace Facility. I should really say it. Thanks to the Africa Peace Facility, it enabled the operationalization of the African peace and security architecture. It gave credibility to the EU Commission vis-à-vis member states, vis-à-vis international partners, vis-à-vis regional economic communities in Africa, which are quite active in the area of peace and security. And it also enabled us to undertake very visible activities that gave meaning to the provisions of the Peace and Security Council protocol. Already before the launch of the AU, we initiated a mission in Burundi, which was funded by the EU, 25 million euro, if I remember well, from the European Development Fund. In fact, the mechanism we used in Burundi, which was then generalized for the Africa Peace Facility, taking a percentage from the European Development Fund, part funds allocated to African states, part the envelope that was not allocated. And then later, thanks to the Africa Peace Facility, we were able to do AMIS in Sudan, the African Union Mission in Sudan, which later on became UNAMID. We did AMISOM in Somalia, which is still going on, and a different name. We did MISCA in CAR, and we did smaller missions, like the Regional Task Force for the Elimination of the LRA. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, because often we tend to forget and just look at the challenges. The second key element I would like to highlight in the partnership was the establishment of regular meetings between the AU Peace and Security Council and the European Union COPS, Political and Security Committee. I think, COPS anyway, I know just through the acronym. And of course, the meetings were not always meetings where we reach agreements. I remember on Libya, we deferred completely. And I believe the AU was vindicated in the way we looked at the issue, in my view, very much vindicated. But those meetings are also important to exchange views and also to see how to address differences. And later on, of course, the partnership evolved. There were some developments which somehow highlighted also the challenges in getting the two continents together. I would just list two, which in my view are also very telling, and they may be a bit dated, but they are important because I was at the AU, so I really have a lived experience of it. And it's also important because we can draw lessons from it. The first one, in my view, was on Libya. In 2011, we had a particular position at the EU calling for dialogue to achieve a transition to democracy, to ease Gaddafi out, but through dialogue. The EU, of course, the military operation was undertaken by NATO, but the EU took a different position, of course, because most, if not all of its member states supported the NATO-led intervention. Germany abstained at the Security Council and took a different position. And I remember a meeting we had in Cairo in 2011 with the EU, the Arab League, and the UN, and during which we were not able to issue a communique because obviously the EU was on one side insisting on Gaddafi must go. We agreed Gaddafi must go, but except that we felt that as much as you have to clean the house, you should also be careful at not destroying it completely. And you know what happened later on in the Sahel. And I believe the EU itself is feeling the consequences of the collapse of Libya, and probably they would have been well advised to listen to the EU. And I think it impacted the partnership a bit. The second point it happened 4 years later, I believe. Again, I speak from memory, so I can't remember exactly, but I think 2015, 2014, but probably 2015 or 2014, was the decision by the EU Commission to reduce its contribution to AMISOM. AMISOM is the AU mission in Somalia, which is currently called AUSOM. And they decided to cap the payment of stipends to the uniformed personnel to 728 or 730, as opposed to 1,028 or 1,040 before. Again, the EU may have had good reasons to do it. I suspect there was a fatigue. There are other files they wanted to attend to, and there was also a feeling that maybe the Somalis should get their acts together for the military operation to succeed. But I was Director of Peace and Security, so I have a very vivid memory of it. The decision was poorly communicated, and we felt that we were really placed in the face of a fait accompli, because obviously there is an asymmetry in power, in the relationship between the AU and the EU. And then later on, the, the Africa Peace Facility, which for me was really a fantastic instrument, was replaced by the European Peace Facility. Now, in fairness to the EU, and I was checking, in fact, yesterday with some former colleagues from the EU, who are no longer in the EU, but who are who were involved, the European Peace Facility has continued to allocate important resources to African operations. But the difference, obviously, is that it's much larger. It's no longer an Africa Peace Facility. It's a European Peace Facility. It allows the EU to undertake a range of interventions, including military, or to support them, rather, and also to deal with a number of actors, including with states within Africa and coalitions of the willings. And as a result, the centrality of the EU and the centrality of the African peace and security architecture has been affected, inadvertently, but affected somehow. And I think we can provide more details on it. I just wanted to put this in context. Now, quickly, in 1 minute, what could the AU do? My conviction, personally, of course, I'm speaking now as a former AU, so I am not speaking on behalf of the EU, absolutely not, just on the strengths of my own experience, is that obviously this is an important partnership. A partnership we should reinforce, and I'm glad that the Luanda Summit took place. Obviously, it's always a mix of optimism, realism, and unsettled issues, but well, that's how life works. The partnership is important, but it's not a unique partnership. Africa has diversified, and I'm glad Africa has diversified. So the EU is an important partner, but not the only partner. I think it's important for just everyone to know that. I think Africans are more assertive in expressing what they want, in my view, and they should be listened to. They want a multilateral system that is grounded in international law. and so on. And they want, of course, to be consulted. EU can support. It has much more financial resources, but they want projects, offers to be designed rather than just being, supply driven. But I should also say that if we, as Africans, want the partnership to work as much as possible in support of our initiative, we need also to get our acts together as Africans. And getting our acts together means definitely dealing with our peace and security challenges in a more proactive fashion, because obviously, in a continent that is affected by crisis and conflicts in literally every region, our ability to weigh on partnership is quite challenged. We need to be more strategic in the way we deal with all our partners. It's good to be courted. Now we have, everyone is coming to Africa. People have rediscovered our demography, our critical minerals, and our diplomatic weight. But we have to be very strategic in how we leverage those partnerships because, of course, many people can come. Diversification can only be a power if you leverage it, smartly. And then last point, obviously, we need to be more united, more systematic in the way we develop our positions and stick to them as we deal with our partners, the EU, but also other partners. But you could develop it a bit later. Thank you so much once more for the invitation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very experience-based analysis on the EU-Africa partnership and its evolutions. There are two things from what you talked about that I think would be good questions maybe to get Mr. Asad Beg's perspectives on. One is you were talking about how in the earlier years, the EU was instrumental in supporting the African Union become an effective peace and security actor in Africa. With some of the financing mechanisms that were available. But you also touched on one of the sticky points that comes up again and again in the EU-Africa partnership, which is this thing of the EU's not listening to us well, or that not enough consultation is happening on the way forward. My question to you, Mr. Beg, is number one, you have attended the recently concluded EU+EU Summit in Angola. My question to you is, what has changed in the partnership? A lot of people ask, okay, what is new? Will this partnership deliver? Will we have more collaboration? But the other thing is the EU's partnership model itself is changing. It's changing towards one that is going out of what you were talking about, Mr. Wan, which centered development cooperation at the core, and now is moving towards more an interest-based partnership. So my question to you, Mr. Beg, is how should partners understand this change? And in this change, what is also the EU proposing as its unique proposition or as its unique advantage? What is the EU's unique contribution to partners? What does it bring to the table?
Thank you very much for the invitation. Oh, I'm sorry, there's a bit of an echo.
We hear you fine.
You can hear? Oh, okay. So I would take inspiration from the motto of the Olympics, which is faster, higher, stronger. And I think over the 25 years, we've seen how the relationship has evolved in this. We stand united in values, bound by purpose and inspired by a shared vision for the future. We were there in Luanda for the EU-Africa Summit, myself and my colleagues here, Tim, Saula, and Gitte. But what I would like to say is what has changed. I think there are 4 C's that I would like to enumerate with you. The first, I think, is co-creation. We cannot be in the paradigm of a donor-recipient logic on both sides. And I think what we have to do is, and that was marked in the summit, is that we will discuss together, we will create together, and we hope we will enjoy together. We are working closely with the African Union, with the regional economic communities, and with the different member states who are there from the African side. Africa is a vast continent with 50 plus different realities, so one size doesn't fit all, but we're happy to share our experience together. So I think the key is co-creation and having a conversation, not just with the political leaders, but also with civil society and youth. The average age in Africa is 19. In Europe, it's 44. So it was important that on the eve of the summit, that we had the CSO Youth Forum, where we had representatives from all across the continent, as well as the diaspora engaging in exchanges. And I'm pleased that we've now announced a formal CSO youth mechanism. And they had their declaration and they presented it to the leaders at the summit. Second C is a capacity to deliver faster. I think we have been too slow at times in responding to African demands. We now see that we have, under the Global Gateway, we have announced 150 billion at the last summit in 22, and now 120 billion have been announced on digital, transport, energy, health, education, innovation. These are responding to Africa's demands for investment, for industrialization, and for jobs. Third C, I think it's also looking at cost of capital. We see that Africa finds it has to pay a higher interest rates if they want to get access to funding. I think we are also looking at ways of blended financing, de-risking instruments to make it more accessible. So I think this is one area on trade, finance, and technical assistance with the AFCFTA, that this could be a potential great game changer. By the middle of this century, the population of Nigeria, I understand, and I speak under the control of my colleague Richard Young, will have a population greater than the European Union. By the middle of this century, 1/4 of the world will be African. So there is a huge potential also for the market. There's a huge potential for collaboration between our two continents. The last area I would say is we need to look at collective impact. We shouldn't just be looking at inputs. Traditionally, the EU has been very good at speaking about how much money we've spent on these various sectors, on prosperity, on peace, on people, on the planet. But I think we will now need to work together. And the homework that we have given ourselves, or the leaders have given, is that within 6 months of this summit, we will have a senior officials meeting, which will then agree and unveil an implementation plan. We will also then have a new follow-up mechanism, which is going to then report on a regular basis on what has been said and what has been done and what has been the impact of these actions. If I turn to the question on comparative advantage, I would say four eyes, sorry, not 5 eyes. And I have, I'll be quick. First is investment. We are the largest foreign direct investment partner of the African Union. If you look at the numbers, we are 263 billion euros, 6 times higher than China, for example, in terms of foreign direct investment stock. If we look at the trade figures, we are 33% of African trade, whereas Russia, for example, is 1% of African trade. So I think investment is something that we can bring together. The next I think, is institutions. We have a strong institutional pedigree that we have built up over time, and we're pleased to share that experience with the African Union, with the regional economic communities, and of course with our partner countries in Africa. Another I think, is integrity. We must, and that was mentioned clearly in Luanda, we must fight double standards. We need to make sure that we apply international law on the same basis in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan and elsewhere. And I think that must be the common, our values are our interests. And I think this will be something that can unite us together. And the last I think, is innovation. We have a strong experience and interest and know-how on green, on digital, on health and education. And I think we're happy to share that also with our African partners. So in summary, I would say that we have realized that we need to have a stronger conversation. We need to listen to each other at a deeper level. And I think we need to move from words and commitments into stronger actions. And we need to communicate that both to each other, but also to our citizens, especially young people and shakers and movers. And I think the think tank community, you can provide a shared space and help us discover and unpack some of the more sensitive issues. Sensitive issues include the external impact of internal policies like CBAM, deforestation. Sensitive issues also include the theme of the year. I mean, you're in Berlin. We recall the Berlin conference that took place in 1885, when you remember that famous cartoon of Bismarck and the others cutting the cake of Africa. So I think we also have to recognize it's not an easy conversation, but the theme of the year is justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. Some of the words I recall from the summit were a more just, inclusive and effective and legitimate multilateral system. So I think I will return back to the theme of the summit, which is promoting prosperity and peace through effective multilateralism. And I think that is a theme that we will need to take forward. And I hope in the spirit of the Olympics, we can be faster in delivery, we can be of higher ambition, and that we will be stronger together. So thank you very much, and look forward to the exchanges. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Begg. A lot of your interventions around investment, innovation, global gateway, indeed are a testament to the fact that the EU has changed how it should do cooperation, and that it speaks to a lot of engagement with private sector. So I'm gonna now move on to Ambassador Brottingham, because when trying to get the economy right, Germany is considered an anchor state in the EU, and oftentimes externally also its pragmatic and economics-based partnership model is appreciated and welcomed by international partners. Germany too is considering having a partnership around private sector investment and engagement. So my question to you is, how do you assess the knowledge, readiness, appetite of the German private sector to invest in Africa, including in areas that could be of strategic importance to Germany?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And first of all, thank you to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung and to APRI for actually organizing this conference. I think it is very, very timely to have this discussion, and really happy to participate in it. Please allow me to start with a short reflection actually on the summit and the main takeaways from my side. And the colleagues from the External Action Service pointed out the motto of the summit, well, promoting peace and prosperity through effective multilateralism. And I think the summit really delivered on that. This was not only a very constructive atmosphere in Luanda, it was also, well, it was 70 participating states and 35 were on the level of heads of state and government. The joint declaration speaks for itself with the topics. And Germany and and the EU, or the EU and Germany, I think could prove that we are and remain reliable partners for Africa, and that we want to address together with the African countries the global challenges of our time, which is a deep conviction also for my government that we can only tackle these issues if we work together. But it needs to be on shared interests that we work together, and on the principles of respect, reciprocity, and reliability. One of the actions, and it was also mentioned, is of course multilateralism and the challenges that are posed to the multilateral system today. And it became very clear during the summit, EU and AU both, they vouch for multilateralism. We stand for that. And also for standing up for a rules-based international order. And I think this is a very important signal that the summit could send. And of course, this relates then to the UN Pact for the Future UN reform process. And the colleagues from the EU, they mentioned that justice for Africans, this is also in the multilateral system, because the multilateral system does not represent the African continent. And that was also, of course, addressed, the question of a reform of the multilateral system. And we can do that together. If you count all the African states and the EU member states together, we are more than 40% of the UN. So this is really something to build on. Trade relations. The trade, what I heard from a lot of interventions during the summit was the transitioning from aid to trade. And I think this is really important, and this is in our interest as well. This is in the interest of the European Union, of the European Union member states. So we can build on that, we can expand our economic relations. And some of the instruments have been already mentioned, starting with Global Gateway, but also Green Energy Initiative from the EU or the African Continental Free Trade Area are important on that. And there was a business forum also at the summit, and there was a huge interest in business relations. So coming to your question, the private sector-based partnerships and how can we do that? The figures are really telling. If you look at the German foreign trade with Africa, this is only 2%. And Germany's foreign direct investments in Africa are 1%. This is really, really low. And the question is why that is the case. As I said, there is a great interest on the one hand. It's increasing also, and one could see that not only at the AU+EU summit, but also in Nairobi last year at the German-African summit there. There are also, to be honest, perceived risks. So the economic risk of entering many of African markets still appear high for many businesses, especially and this is the backbone still of our economy in Germany, for small and medium-sized enterprises. So I wouldn't say they are risk averse, but of course, if you have a business, you have to see the pros and cons. And if you're small or medium-sized, maybe the risk is you think the risk is too high, and this is your evaluation, and this is fair enough. And the business environments. In some cases, the macroeconomic conditions and business environments in African countries are not yet attracting foreign investments. What can we do? Of course, support for companies on the one hand, and we want to do that. We offer German companies a wide range of support to help overcome hurdles. We have to look into export credit guarantees and the systems we have. Also supporting African companies, of course, if they want to have that, to strengthen the business environment, to attract foreign direct investment. And I would like also to, in this case, to point out especially the Compact with Africa, the G20 initiatives for improving macroeconomic stability and for strengthening business environment and creating the conditions needed to attract more sustainable private investments. And there are a growing number of African countries who are interested to join the Compact, and this is a very positive sign from my point of view. And of course, it's this question that is also mentioned in our coalition treaty. It's integration of development cooperation and foreign trade promotion. This is something that aroused some question marks, to be honest, but actually to try to find synergies between the two is actually, and to integrate development cooperation and foreign trade promotion more closely is in the interest of all. And it actually also relates to what I mentioned here, transitioning from aid to trade, to work, to do more for supporting African partners in really creating jobs and really creating sustainable business investments. And of course, there are a lot of areas where our development aid can support the economic sector. There's also is sustainable economic development, sustainable environmental development in a way. Yeah, this I think is what the area that we have to go deeper in is what are the areas of shared benefit and collaboration. So where is the interest-based partnerships? As I said, there is a lot of economic opportunities we can work on. There are a lot of also shared objectives we want to work on. I would leave it with that, and I'm looking forward to the discussion and the questions.
Thank you for that. Yeah, the reason why I asked this question around private sector, and maybe we will come back to it when we have the Q&A, is because indeed, as you mentioned, we're moving increasingly towards a development cooperation for trade and investment-based model. But this idea of centering the private sector, if we say that's the way forward, number one, requires that the private sector is ready and interested in investing, because otherwise we will have gotten the thinking and the strategy right, but then in reality nothing would have been achieved, which adds further frustration to a partnership which already struggles with walking the talk. So that is one of the reasons. The second reason is, of course, a more fundamental, it brings back a more fundamental question on what is then the role of the state, which is, touches on a bit on the ideology of the role of the state and what should the relationship between the state and the private sector be, not only in African countries, but also in Germany and elsewhere. But maybe this is something that we can pick up later. I will now bring Mr. Udo Buhlmann to this conversation. My question to you is twofold. On the one hand, it's a question around who shapes the EU-Africa agenda. Oftentimes, when we talk about the EU-Africa partnership, we're thinking of the Commission, the EU Commission, or we're talking about the EU Council as the ones that shape the agenda, and the same on the African side. But I want to understand better from you on what is the role of the EU Parliament, what is the role of EU citizens and non-state actors, and the same on the African side in shaping the partnership. The second question relates to a point that you also raised, Ambassador, around multilateralism. That was also raised by Mr. Beg on multilateralism, which is, in the past few years, both continents, the world in general, has experienced one shock after another. For Europe, of course, the most formative ones were perhaps the war in Ukraine and the recent rupture in the transatlantic partnership, which has strengthened Europe's resolve for maintaining, even if after reform, the multilateral landscape. But these global crises have also brought to the fore necessary, but at times challenging conversations among European and African policymakers on topics that Mr. Beg mentioned around double standards. Who is this global order serving? How can we center the previously peripherized, and a lot of these questions. So my question to you is, what do you think Europe has learned on how to partner with Africa better as a result of some of these crises that it has experienced and the world has undergone.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting discussion today, and many thanks to Lidl for this inspiring questions. My first question goes to the organizers. How many days do we have to discuss this, and can we continue tomorrow? Because it's really big what you are asking us, but exactly the right kind of questions. Thank you. Allow me to start with the latter. Multilateralism, and grateful to Ms. Bräutigam already have touched on that, and led us back to the Summit of the Future. That was my starting point that I wanted to come in with. I take you back to the September 2024 to New York. I was on a mission of a European Parliament's delegation. We were receiving our EU ambassador, Lambrinidis, who had co-negotiated, and he was coming into the briefing room totally refreshed, euphoric, relaxed. Guys, we got it. It was the African nations, Latin America, and us who saved multilateralism. And you will very well remember that there was a huge attack on multilateralism as a organization principle of our international collaboration, led by one important player who took an interest in destructing this multilateral order. And for me, it was like also a positive surprise that the echo came from Africa. I think in this case, if I remember rightly, it was Congo-Brazzaville who took the floor, as well as Mexico. The two of them were arguing, and it's now in my memory, guys from Moscow, whether we like you or whether we don't like you, this is not at stake. What at stake is today is our future. And our future is in a peaceful multilateral order. And if the Europeans are arguing like that, we share this view. And we thought, gosh, this is a new age. We are opening a new page. And we were going back to Brussels, and this was also the opinion of our ambassador, freshly coming to New York, because before he served in Washington, it was not easy neither. We said, okay, rightly so, the Global South has an expectation to this new page that had been opened today. What did they expect, rightly, from us, from this new page, from this new collaboration? Well, at least a summit with a new declaration. It's a joke. I'm very happy that we had this summit. I'm extremely happy that we met in Angola, and I'm also extremely happy that many European leaders were there in physical presence, as well as those who have been connected by the web. But it's serious, because many of those in the South who really believe in multilateralism run out of time. This world is running out of time. If we look at the dynamics, if we look at the huge conflicts, and allow me to name a couple of them from my point of view. Of course, it was already mentioned, thanks to honorable colleagues from the External Action Service, in about 25 years, a quarter of the world population is from Africa. African citizens, right? We have to realize that. And each and every year, we have some 12 million young Africans entering a labor market which does not exist, because most of them are going to the informal sector if they have a decent perspective, which is not a decent perspective. But of course we have to understand decent job creation is #1 request of our partners in the Global South. We need to see that there is an unrest of young people. The youth is on the run. The youth is on riots in Africa. That is not only in the Sahel, that is not only in the west of Africa. That is also in that countries where Europeans would say, okay, like in Kenya, everything is on the right track. But we see the unrest of the young people nearly everywhere because they are knowing very well what chances this world is offering, and they compare with the situation back home and with their personal perspectives. Yes, they would like to contribute to the future of their countries, but do they have the real chance to doing that? So there is no time to lose. And are we really living up already to these high hopes that were connected with the event in New York? And this is my very question, where we need to deliver, because it's in our self-interest. I hear a lot, and the Brussels colleagues know that very well, we hear a lot of transactionalism as a new paradigm of our collaboration. I like from aid to trade, but I warn against misunderstandings. Sometimes it's also just vocabulary that hides selfishness. Nobody in the Global South would not understand if we articulate our interests. Yes, of course we have strategic interests, and it's totally okay to mention them and to bring them into trade negotiations, into economic collaborations. But let's really be serious. What does it mean? And how do we anchor that into our new forms of collaboration? Transactionalism means that we have to see the other part as well. What is the interest? Skills, decent job creation, the deepening of the value chain in our partner countries. That means the inclusion of local SMEs. That means also a perspective for a higher degree of industrialization, sustainable industrialization in the Global South. And if I may come in with that element, because we forced or brought that into the Commission's practice in the last mandate, also to fight inequalities, because fighting inequalities is a precondition for sound developments in each and every society, whether that is in the South or whether that is in the North. So that is my point of view, and this is where I come from, and now the thing is going to become very practical. Yes, external actions colleagues are right. Global Gateway is one of the most decisive elements. Another one is Global Europe, the forthcoming international part of the MFF, the multi-annual financial framework for some 7 years, which is discussed and has to be negotiated between Council and European Parliament on the proposal of the Commission. Many changes, we are working on that. There is good and bad, and we have to discuss it. But my benchmark is indeed measurement. Yes, I would like to measure, and I could only echo what colleagues have said. It's not about input, it's about impact. So let's start to have a clear-cut measurement of our distributional impact assessment. There is some 130 billion or 170 billion US dollar each year to be invested only in infrastructure in Africa. Of course we need private investment, no doubt about it. Can it be only done by public resources? Neither African public nor European public. We need to collaborate. But what really is the outcome of all of that? Can we measure that? Yes, we need to bring electricity by local sources, especially sustainable local sources. So we have to concentrate on that. But in what parts of the big and always bigger cities will we have light afterwards? Only in the quartier of the privilege? Or do we have also light in the townships where 70 or 80% live? Do we invest in decent housing? Can we afford to talk about the economy without talking about the production of global goods? This is the very question we need to implement in the design of our instruments if we would like and if we would wish that they fly to a new positive horizon. That is, for me, enough for my preliminary remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Buhlmann is telling us that we need to have a partnership that is interest-based, but based off of the interest of both parties. And we seem to agree that multilateralism, for example, at the foundational level, is a joint interest by both continents, and a lot could be achieved further from that. So I will now open up the floor to the rest of you to ask questions, to share your comments. But maybe before I do that, I will drop in 2 points that I feel have not been brought in this discussion. These are rather sensitive questions, but at the core of the partnership, so should be discussed as well. One is this thing around migration, because in a way, migration could have addressed some of the demographic issues that Mr. Buhlmann identified, which is the fact that Africa has a growing population, but the trend is going on the opposite on the European side. What are some of the complementarities there? The other, and it does relate to migration, is the job creation question as well, is in some ways, we are increasingly witnessing the fact that some of the policies, and EU internal policies, are having spillover effect on African economies, and they will then also have spillover effects on job creation. I am here thinking about policies such as CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, for example, or the ones on deforestation. So how do we also be cognizant of the fact that sometimes interests could clash between the two continents, and what would be some of the ways forward going beyond these diverging interests? So I open up the floor to people who want to make comments or ask questions at this point. No questions or comments. Shall I take over? Yes. Okay, yes, please.
I'm worried that my question will be the stupidest one because I feel threatened to ask this question. But let me first of all, my name is Andres Oosthuizen from the South African Embassy here in Berlin. And thank you for your panel. I must say that from my perspective, it is like asking the converted some questions. But let me pose this one question, and I think it was at the very beginning mentioned about the AU Summit that was overshadowed by other events, and so it was not really well captured in Europe. So with all the good things and the positive things being said here at the panel, my question is Europe really ready to engage Africa, to really listen and really talk to them, given what's happening geopolitically around the world? Thank you.
Let me give a chance to the person sitting next to you, and then I'll come to you, Henrik.
Thank you very much. Christoph Matschi, Vice President of the German Africa Foundation. I wanted to come back to one of the topics the colleague from the EU has mentioned, better access to financing. And I would like to ask you, what are the new instruments that are discussed inside EU or between AU and EU
Okay. I now give the floor to the panelists to respond and react to these questions. Maybe I can start in the order of how we're seated. Ambassador, would you like to take some of the questions that you feel compelled to respond to?
I would thank you for the question, first of all. Do I include the questions that you posed as well on migration?
I would be very happy if you did, yes, thank
okay.
you.
So I would, no, but I would start with the question that the colleague from the South African embassy has asked for the AU+EU summit being overshadowed by other topics, and in this case it was, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine that made the news and not the summit, and is Europe really engaging? The interest of the media is something we can't actually, it's not in our hand. So if there is something that is decided to be the top news in the media, this is something we can't do. Having said that, it is crystal clear that this partnership and this working with the African partners is very, very important. And this is it's not the evening news. This is the everyday work. And I think that is a serious commitment from Germany, from the German government, but I would also say from the EU to work on this. So for that, it's not always what makes the news. That is really the solid base for cooperation. With regard to migration, this is a topic being discussed, but it is also a topic with shared interest from the AU and the EU. So the AU has made it very clear, and African states have made it clear, that they also want increased cooperation for combating migrant smuggling, for human trafficking, and they also want enhanced legal pathways for migration, which is fair enough. And this is something we are working on, and we need to deliver also on commitments. So there are active European-African migration dialogues, and we need to engage with that, the Khartoum process, the Rabat process platforms. It is also, of course, it is a win-win potential in the migration question, because, as has been said, we have a demography where European societies get older and older. So we need skilled workforce. And due to this aging population. And on the other hand, there's Africa that has increasingly younger populations that lack sufficient job opportunities. So having a skilled labor migration is something that is in our own interest. Having said that, of course, this is, and we need to offer opportunities for young and motivated Africans who want to come and work, and if it is temporarily, it's absolutely fine. There is one question in that, and we also have that is also with other regions. This is brain drain, and this is not so easy, because if you have to be very careful not to produce brain drain from African countries, because these skilled workers are also needed in these countries. And one of the questions is actually offering vocational trainings on the spot in African countries. And also what I mentioned, Will, and others also mentioned, that creating job opportunities with businesses. So there is a lot to talk about that, but also one aspect I would like to really mention, also because the crises and the multiple crises, and it's not only conflict, it's also climate change driven, are happening. Migration is foremost happening within Africa. It is actually neighboring countries that take really the burden if people have to leave, be it because of a conflict, or but also because of climate change and other issues. And migration is really, it's one aspect in our joint agenda between EU and Africa, or European states and Africa, but it's not the only one and should not be the only one. I would actually leave it with that and hand over to my colleagues on the panel.
Mr. Owen, would you like to take some of the questions?
Thank you. 2 questions. One on how the EU could help Africa deal with its peace and security challenges. There is definitely a lot the two could do together, but obviously the primary responsibility is an African responsibility. It's an African responsibility, and luckily, we do have all the institutional and normative and policy tools needed to deal with our crisis throughout the conflict cycle, in terms of prevention, peacemaking, peace support operations, peace building. Africa has really a very rich framework. Our challenge, of course, is the challenge of implementation. And that's why I believe, as Africans, our focus in the period ahead should be less on further normative and policy development, but more on implementation. And implementation as a strategic shift, that should be the focus. Post-policy development, normative development, and focus on implementation. And that requires a lot of political will, political commitment, which we have to generate as Africans. It won't drop from the sky. It has to be generated. It has to be nurtured. And there is obviously another element of it, an element of capacity and resources, which we don't necessarily, which we don't have, let's say, in an adequate fashion. And that's where I believe the EU can play a role, and it did already play a role. I did mention it when I referred to the Africa Peace Facility, which was really critical in helping the EU take off in the area of peace and security. Now, in a more concrete fashion, what could the EU do? I would see 2 lines of work. One on long-term prevention. And when I refer to long-term prevention, I'm referring to societies that are well-governed, based on the principles of democracy, respect for human rights, transparency in the management of national resources. And here, again, the AU and its regional economic communities have developed rich frameworks. How could the EU help us? And they do some work, I remember from my days at the AU, but how could the EU help us better? Help us better in the implementation. Implementation through the strengthening of African continental institutions that are in charge of monitoring the implementation of these tools. I think of the Anti-Corruption Board, which is based in Arusha, Tanzania, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is based in Gambia, the African Court on Human and People's Rights, which is in Arusha, the African Peer Review Mechanism, and so on and so on. And these are African structures that, by the way, do a very good work, but are facing serious constraints. To which extent could you help us or help these institutions better perform in the discharge of their responsibility? And I believe a better governed Africa will definitely be a less conflict-prone Africa. I strongly believe in long-term prevention. It does not necessarily attract a lot of attention, but it's far more rewarding. And we have the tools, we have the instruments, it's important to build on them. The second way through which the EU could help in a more general fashion would be, when you engage African stakeholders on issues of linked to governance, human rights, democracy, engage them on the basis of African instruments. These are very sensitive issues. Africa will not democratize through, imposition from outside. It never worked anywhere in the world, and it will not work in Africa. This is an African battle. It's our battle. Obviously, we need help. And any engagement has to be based on African instruments. I insist on it because often issues of governance are very sensitive. Governments are quite sensitive when they see outsiders coming to meddle into what they perceive, and not always wrongly, as domestic affairs. And I believe engaging Africans on the basis of their own instruments and how to help them implement their commitments would be politically far more sensitive than trying to engage them on the basis of policy preferences of Berlin, Paris, Washington, or wherever else. It does not work, especially not in today's Africa. We have a complete demographic change, young people who think differently, and there is also, let's be frank, a greater yearning for Africans being in charge of their own issues. And I think it's an important element. A third area in which I believe the EU can help, and help a lot, relate to peace operations. And we refer a lot, obviously, nowadays to insecurity in the Sahel. I'm sure you're all aware of what's going on in the region. The experience of the past few years has shown that large forces, as envisioned by the EU, were not sustainable. There is no willingness or capacity from African states to fund them. And there is definitely not willingness now from our partners to provide the funding that is required. I did refer to the experience I went through, with the EU, the 2719 resolution adopted by the UN. It's a good step forward, but implementation has been quite challenging. Up to now, it has not been implemented. And I believe we have to be very smart in the way we deal with these issues. And what I'm looking at is really learning from something I have seen or read about in Europe on how you have managed to develop very agile security cooperation modalities through joint procurement, through the pooling of strategic assets, of medevac, casevac capabilities, and other ways of doing business that would very much be replicable in the African context. So you could share your experience on that to encourage African countries to pool their efforts together in a very flexible format. It could be 2 states, 3 states, 4 states, but also through the European Peace Facility, funding could be provided to incentivize countries to pool their efforts together. And I think it's an area we have not explored sufficiently in my view. There was a question about the APF and EPF. The issue, the point I was trying to make is not, I can understand, obviously, because the EU itself has shifting priorities, they are dealing with new realities, and they want to address them. So I could see where they're coming from. The point I'm making is, as you do it and as you adjust, and by the way, the EU did not stop supporting African operations or missions, when the EPF was established, is always that element, because you're dealing with a partner. So that partner is entitled to explanations, is entitled to be brought on board, so that actions you may take, maybe for good reasons, are not perceived as disengagement. I think it's an important element. And that's why I refer to those 2 examples from my own experience going forward. You have to understand, because it's not only the EU that needs to be convinced of the rationale of what it's doing, because since you're dealing with other actors, you need to get them on board. And then if you don't do it, your actions, even well-intentioned, can be understood differently. One last point, if you allow me. I just wanted to go back to the issue of multilateralism, I think, which is very important. And we, as Africans, probably more than anyone else, have a stronger interest in an inclusive and stronger multilateral system. Not that the multilateral system that emerged after the Second World War was fair or inclusive. It was neither fair nor inclusive. Neither fair nor inclusive. But still, it gave us a seat at the table, and we were able to build coalition to advance our agenda. The whole decolonization agenda and the fight against apartheid was prosecuted using that very not sufficiently inclusive, not sufficiently fair multilateral system. So we have an interest in preserving it. At the same time, we also would like to reform it without breaking it. We have to reform it, and I believe the current moment is a moment of opportunity as well for Africa, because balance of forces are being reshaped, new powers are emerging. It's an opportunity for us as Africans to contribute to shaping a new multilateral system that would be fair, that would be inclusive, and give Africa its rightful place. A last point on it has to do, I think, the ambassador, you referred to a multilateral system that is based on a rule-based order. I would say in Africa, people are increasingly nervous when they hear rule-based order, because the understanding of people is, well, who is making those rules? Very few people. How are they implemented? Very selectively, and often disregarded when they become inconvenient. So we prefer international law. Simple. And by the way, I noticed in the joint declaration, reference was made to international law, and from what I understand from my discussions with EU colleagues, I think the EU wanted to get rule-based order, EU pushed back, and you settled for international law. And I think it's an important element, for you to keep in mind. Probably you may mean the same thing through rule-based order, but many in Africa understand it differently, not only in Africa, but also elsewhere. I think I will stop here. Thank you so much.
Because a lot of the questions were also directly addressed to you, Mr. Beg, I will first give the floor to Mr. Bullman in case you wanted to react to some of the questions. Perhaps you also want to reflect on the question on Sudan and how the EU values positions.
If you allow me, I go first to the question from South Africa, because that was the listening. Are you really committed to listening and to fully understand? I would say that the recent experience, the bilateral experience of the two memoranda of understanding that were signed in this mini-summit before G20 in Johannesburg was a very positive example of mutual listening and of mutual success. Memorandum of understanding for investment, memorandum of understanding for trade, negotiated for some 12 months between both sides, a success story because it is exactly not green colonialism. It's a project in mutual interest where good people from both sides have involved themselves in general as well as in detail. Good products were made, and one of the most important elements, I may say that as the leader of the South African delegation of the European Parliament, who had 2 interparliamentary meetings exactly for this purpose during the last 12 months, the regulatory dialogue that was agreed upon is an avenue, a process, which was planned from both sides. So it's not a one-off thing. We sign something and then we have trade. No, it's a process of learning from each other, avoiding the negative spillovers Lidette was talking about, and maximizing the positive spillovers. So let us take this as a positive experience. Let's work on that so that it is really flourishing. I can hear from from all sides of your government of unity that this is very much appreciated. And let's also work on the policy coherence from our side. Policy coherence is one possible answer to many questions, because when I was asking the European side as well as the South African side, we love this new arrangements, but I cannot understand the paragraph on poultry and why is it so important that we export chicken to South Africa. There is a long story about agricultural exports from Europe, most of the time mass production. Nobody can answer the question. So policy coherence, even in the good examples, is an ongoing exercise that we have to serve on. That is also with the private sector question. I visited projects in Namibia, excellent ones, the use of green hydrogen, where the steel production could be revolutionized because it's possible to produce green iron, cutting off the most emission-causing process of the steel production, where whole Europe is asking themselves, do we do that with gas or with coal, or emission is a big problem. So they do it with green hydrogen, but where is the demand? Where's the demand for that? If you look at, and now we talk to the industrial politics sides of Europe, if we ask them, is that possible to have that useful economic collaboration with our steel production? And they say, oh, well, be cautious because our huge steel producers have just introduced new mechanical procedures in which we need the added value exactly from this first phase, and we use now gasoline instead of what we did before with coal. So come on, we don't have an integrated policy for the Global South, and here we have to grow into our own positive wording, into our own positive papers, into our own positive commitments. Lots of things have to be done to improve ourselves here. And that applies also to this question with the Sudan. And we are right in the middle, and I'm keen listening to my colleagues and friends from the External Action Service. We are right in the middle of negotiating trade agreements with the Emirates, for example. And I have asked questions to the commissioner responsible for trade, who is an honest guy doing an excellent job, no criticism on that. But my impression is that the questions have not yet been answered, because there's different people working on different files with different partners. And to have what we are permanently talking about, a sovereign European Union occupying its justified and sovereign place in a new global order, let's grow into that role, okay?
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to you, Mr. Begg, to respond to some of your questions.
Thank you. I'll tackle three sets of questions, one on migration mobility, one on financing instruments, and one on Sudan.
Yes.
The first one on migration and mobility. I'm also the co-chair of the continent-to-continent migration mobility dialogue with the AU Commission counterparts, and I'm pleased that Richard is the ex-C2C MMT co-chair. But I would say, looking at migration and mobility, when we had the negotiations for the joint communique, this was a relatively okay part of negotiations where we seemed to come to consensus relatively quickly. I would characterize this as 4 E's. The first is equity. I think we need, and we have put that in paragraph 40 to 44, we need to respect human rights and international humanitarian law and uphold this when we engage in the issue of migration. Second E is evidence. If we look at the numbers, between 70 to 80%, according to experts, of migration is happening within Africa. You have the Southern Africa corridor. You also have the corridor going towards the east, to the Horn and to the Middle East. 20% is coming to the EU. So there we're looking at preventing irregular migration and also looking at effective, safe, timely, and dignified return, readmission, and reintegration, and addressing the root causes. That links up with prosperity and the investments of creating jobs and industrialization that was mentioned by the panel. Third E is empowerment. It's also looking at legal pathways for migration. How can we also invest in circular migration? Because as you mentioned, in terms of demographics, average age in Europe is 44. We can see in some countries that the pensions will need to be paid for by young people in employment. We will have gaps in certain sectors of the economy, from agriculture, healthcare, logistics, doctors, nurses. But how do we tackle the brain drain and maybe the brain waste that will be coming? So we're looking at circular migration. Another area is engagement with the African diaspora. The African diaspora is sending back around 100 billion euros every year through remittances. We also tackle that in the joint communique. We want to try to lower the cost of remittances and also help use that for investments. We talked about the global gateway. That's 150 billion in 7 years, but within a year and a half, remittances can provide that. How can that be channeled for investment? Last E is engagement. So I think we have the Khartoum process, the Rabat process. We also have the Team Europe initiatives on the Western Mediterranean and the Central Mediterranean, and we have the continent-to-continent migration mobility dialogue. So I think all of these conversations are taking place, and it's good that the business community during the Africa-Europe Business Forum has also taken up this issue on circular migration, as well as the CSO and youth issue. And visas are also one issue we need to also tackle together. Second cluster is looking at financing. So we can see that in some countries there is serious liquidity challenges, also due to the high debt service costs and also the increase in repayments of interest. I served in China previously for 8 years, 4 years in Beijing, 4 years in Hong Kong. But we can see that other countries have also been now providing debt in exchange for certain investments. So there is some debt distress that countries are suffering. The G20 common framework remains one of the key tools for restructuring, and we can see good examples in Zambia, Chad, Ethiopia, and Ghana. Another instrument is looking at, we have a 3-pillar approach within the IMF and World Bank, looking at number one, domestic reforms, and domestic resource mobilization is one element of that. Another is concessional financing and tailored debt actions. For example, the debt to development swaps, the debt for climate conversion supported by the European Investment Bank. So I think there are elements there, and we need, I think, more innovative approaches to this issue. And I think our colleagues from the Commission, Taxud would be, and FISMA would be best placed, and we can provide the details through the chair if needed to follow up on that. Regarding the issue of Sudan, we had extensive exchanges in the negotiations for the joint communique. And I would recall paragraph 5 of the joint communique, which says, guided by these rules and principles, and these are rules and principles of the United Nations that we uphold, and also refraining from the threat or use of force, we reiterate our unwavering support for a just, comprehensive, and lasting peace in Ukraine, in the occupied Palestinian territory, in Sudan, South Sudan, and the DRC, Sahel, and Somalia. And then we had a specific paragraph devoted, paragraph 6, devoted to the situation in Sudan, where the leaders expressed deep concern about the situation and reaffirmed our support for an AU-IGAD-led Sudanese-owned political process towards a unified and civilian transition. We also condemned the atrocities that were committed in El Fasher by the RSF and called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and for unhindered humanitarian access throughout the country. So I think we also have, in the form of Dr. Annette Weber, she's the EU Special Representative for East Africa, including for Sudan and the Horn of Africa. She had numerous meetings in Luanda, and of course has been to the region. And I think our leadership has raised this issue consistently, that we need to apply international law in a consistent manner. And I think, as we mentioned, integrity is key to that. I would just end to say that you have given us some collective homework, which is good, because with the team here, with Tim, Gitte, myself, and others from the Pan-African Division, we will be working closely with the European Commission, also with our member states, with the African Union, in a spirit of co-creation and co-ownership, to now translate all of these commitments into actions. And in a spirit of transparency, we will share this as an implementation plan. And I hope that through the engagement with think tanks, with parliamentarians, with business, with civil society, that we can also advance on not just having this as words, but having these as impactful actions that will improve the lives of people both in Africa, which is our sister continent, and also the lives of people here in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that intervention. And I guess because of the limitations of time, but also the fact that this is a conversation that is not held under Chatham House rules, there are some limitations on, the extent to which we can talk about some of the political tensions and contradictions amongst actors, so that we recognize. And I guess all of us who follow the EU-Africa partnership and have also read the joint declaration, sort of walk out thinking, okay, I mean, a lot of commitments, a lot of support for each other, a lot of, we're vibing, we're thinking, and how much of this will actually be translated is the big question. And that, we will have to wait maybe for the next summit to report on. But I will conclude this panel by sort of highlighting some of the things that give hope, or some of the key takeaways, which is this understanding that whether you see it this way or another, multilateralism seems to be a core joint interest or a challenge for both continents. Of course, how we understand what multilateralism should be may not necessarily be the same. We talked about reform, but at least we agree that that is a starting point. We also talked about the need to keep the conversation open within Europe, within Africa, but also between the two continents, which translates into looking into the EU's policy coherence to also see whether or not the EU is giving in one way and taking another, giving money, but also taking through political or policy decisions. That's a key topic. But also the extent to which the African side is able to do its internal homework is also a good conversation that continues to be had within Africa as well, particularly around peace and security and the implementation of various frameworks that are put in place for governance and for peace and security. So with that, allow me to, or join me to thank all of the panelists who joined us today, and thank you to all of you also who made contributions to this conversation and listened to us, and those of you who also participated online. Thank you very much, and the conversation could continue in the coffee break as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lidette, for this excellent moderation. Thank you to all the panelists for your insightful discussion. So yes, it's time for the break. So we reconvene in 15 minutes. Just a couple of information. So for the people who want to actually attend the session on FCTA, it will be in this room. And for the CRM, it will be on the room upstairs. So you will see a couple of sign, so you just have to follow it. Another technical issue is that you need to take your name tags with you if you are not staying in this room, because you're going to need it for the breakout sessions. Thank you again, and enjoy the coffee break.